Hey there, Kenneth French of Vast Voice, telling business secrets to entrepreneurs. We're very, very happy you stopped by. Either you're going to watch this or listen to this because you want to take your business to the next level. You're probably an entrepreneur who's either just starting out or you've been around for quite a while and you want to take your business to the next level. You're probably a real estate investor, maybe even a real estate agent, maybe a professional or of some sort, professional advisor of some sort. And well, you are stopping by because you need some valuable advice from one of the top industry leaders there is. Anyway, thank you very much. Once again, Kenneth French, Vast Voice, telling business secrets to entrepreneurs. Really glad you stopped by.
Now we get to the big hitters. As I promised, we're going to be hanging out with Bob Bluhm, none other than Bob Bluhm, America's how does this sound? Most famous asset protection attorney. You like that, Bob?
Okay, I'll go with that, Kenner.
We'll be hanging out, chatting with asset protection attorney Bob Bluhm. He's going to help us kind of learn ways to make sure that our assets are protected, making sure there's a moat around our business, making sure that we don't work hard for, 10, 20 years and then have it all taken away because of a lawsuit. This is a big component of the Entrepreneur Expo because we're going to be learning about ways to make sure that people don't take our money. Bob, take it away.
All right. Well, Kenner, thank you. We're going to be talking about asset protection today. And, when we are trying to make money, we call that offense. In whatever business we're in, we always often refer to whatever we're doing as a game. And offense is where we're making money. We're out there playing for keeps. But when a lot of people make a big mistake and think, well, that's all there is to it, to business. I mean, just make a lot of money and all our problems are going to be over. Except you're smarter than that because you know that offense is a very important part of the game, obviously, but offense is only half the game because the other half of the game is called defense. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today, how to protect what we've worked so hard to build up. Asset protection is a topic that really has three different parts to it. One is tax reduction, one is estate planning, and then the third is lawsuit protection. In this part of our talk, we're only going to be talking about lawsuit protection as opposed to the other two. We'll find some time to talk about the other couple of them. I do want to mention just a couple of things about tax reduction. When you are setting up an entity, whether it's a corporation, a limited partnership, or a limited liability company, you can literally save hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes by creating the right structure from the beginning. Now, what do I mean by the right structure? Well, if you're setting up a corporation or an LLC, people often wonder, well, what's the difference between those two? And the short answer is, from a tax standpoint, corporations can be taxed only one of two ways. You've all heard of an S corporation or a C corporation. But a limited liability company can be taxed one of four different ways. It can be taxed exactly the same way as a traditional corporation by being an S corporation or a C corporation, or it can be taxed as a sole proprietorship, or it can be taxed as a partnership. So in other words, a limited liability company has much greater tax flexibility. And we would use a C corporation when you want to provide fringe benefits to you or your family as employees, because most deductions then are available with a C corporation. However, with a C corporation, you have to zero out net income with expenses. Otherwise, you will be double taxed. And one very important point for those who own real estate, we never, ever want to own real estate in a C corporation. We will manage real estate in a C corporation, but it is not a good entity from a tax standpoint for owning real estate. When you have an S corporation, or rather you would use an S corporation when you have earned income. In other words, if you're a real estate investor, you're flipping or wholesaling, or if you have a business that is an operating company that produces active income or earned income, then you want to typically use an S corporation. The reason is, when you own the business, you are paying both sides of the employment tax. You're paying you're paying the employer side and you're paying the employee side because you're an employee of your own business. That can be significant. It's about 15.3% is the self-employment tax when you're paying both sides. And you can reduce that self-employment tax with an S corporation by taking what is called a shareholder distribution, which becomes passive income. It's like a dividend. And you can reduce that self-employment tax significantly by taking a significant part of your income as a shareholder distribution. However, when we're talking about real estate, once again, we do not want to own, buy and hold real estate in an S corporation. The reason is, once again, very negative tax consequences. We would use an LLC as a sole proprietorship when we only have one member of the LLC. We would use a holding company if you are the single member. Rather, we would want the holding company to become the single member. One of the reasons that we'll get into a little bit later is that single member LLCs are very easily pierced, meaning the veil of the LLC that protects you from personal liability is easily pierced when you are the only member of the LLC. One of the benefits of using a sole proprietorship LLC is that you don't have to file a tax return for that particular company because the income and expenses will be reported on your personal return, your 1040. We would use an LLC taxed as a partnership when we own rental property, which is passive income. Passive income is not subject to self-employment tax, which is, again, that 15.3% tax. So rental income is wonderful kind of income because it is passive as opposed to earned income. The easiest structure to use is the LLC with a partnership. It's very flexible. It has the lowest audit risk of any of the four types of tax elections. And once again, as I mentioned, there is no self-employment tax on passive income. Big advantage. The second part of asset protection is estate planning, and we're not going to talk about estate planning right now. We'll have that as a separate topic. But the topic that we really want to get to today is lawsuit protection. There's much more we could talk about on tax reduction. And in fact, I really encourage you, if you're serious about tax reduction, to meet with a tax reduction specialist. And that is someone who doesn't simply prepare the return. It is someone who looks ahead and plans what deductions you should be taking, and so that you can actually proactively reduce your taxes as the year goes on. So now we're going to talk about lawsuit protection, and I want to give you an idea of why I am very passionate about this topic. I started my career long ago as a litigation attorney. I was a trial lawyer. And I was in a very large firm and I got assigned a case, and it was a client that you would recognize, big name, and they had done something wrong. They had fired some guys because of their age, and that is age discrimination. It's a civil offense. Nobody goes to jail for that, but it is subject to money damages. In other words, the plaintiffs, these guys who were who were suing because they had been fired because of their age, were suing for back wages, for their income to be restored, for their jobs to be given back, etc., or at least damages for the firing. Well, they had the facts on the law on their side. They had the law on their side, and we were at trial and getting beat up pretty badly. But the plaintiff's lawyer made a serious mistake, and I capitalized on that mistake, and we won the case. Now, normally when you win, you are ecstatic because not only does it enhance your reputation, of course, but you've invested a couple of years in this case. You've worked evenings and weekends preparing for this case. You've thought about nothing but this case. And when you win, it's a huge victory. But this time was different because so often in civil litigation, it's one company suing another company and the loser writes a check and life goes on. This was different because the plaintiffs here were people. And as I left the courtroom, I saw them with their families huddled, and they were weeping. They were weeping. They were saying, we're never going to we're going to lose our houses. We're never going to send the kids to college. These guys were never going to get another job at that pay level at their age. And they were ruined financially. And that was wrong because the verdict shouldn't have come out that way. It was simply a tactic that went wrong on the plaintiff's side. And I decided at that point that, I had believed in truth and justice in the American way, and going to court was going to unearth the truth, but it didn't work out that way. And so I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. I will not be part of a system like this. And I decided at that point that I was going to leave trial work and take everything I had learned about the courtroom and trials and tactics and everything and turn it 180 degrees around to use it to protect people from lawyers like I used to be. So I am now and have been for many, many, many years an asset protection attorney. And it is so much more satisfying to me because it means you have freedom from fear, you have financial security, and you have peace of mind knowing that you have structured yourself in such a way that even if the worst happens, you will be protected and your family will be protected. All right. So my promise to you as we go through this is I'm going to show you how you can make your wealth literally invisible to creditors and predators, how you can actually repel lawsuits and make it so they don't want to sue you, and how you can invest with confidence, run your business with confidence, knowing that you have protected your family and everything you've worked so hard for. So let's start with the basics. Why do we set up an LLC in the first place? And why do I mention an LLC? Because frankly, corporations prior to LLCs were the go-to tool. In other words, the only game in town. Since LLCs have been created and laws have now been passed and court cases have now developed a law on LLCs, there are far, far more LLCs set up today than corporations. So the LLC is the tool of choice for today. But why do we set them up? Well, I think most people have a vague idea that it is to limit our liability. After all, that's what it's called, a limited liability company. And ultimately, when we really get down to it, it is to protect our personal assets from business risk. Because if we don't have an entity, we are a sole proprietor. And that means you and the business are the same. There's no difference between you and the business. And if the business gets sued for some reason, they're not only suing the business, but also you, and they can take both business and personal assets from you. You can literally be wiped out. But if they sue you, having nothing to do with the business, maybe you were in a car accident that you caused. Now they're suing you, but there's no difference between you and the business, and they can take both business and personal assets again. You can be wiped out. So this is why we set up entities, a corporation or an LLC. It is because that separates the business from you legally. You're no longer a sole proprietor. Now, in a worst case scenario, if the business gets sued, worst case, perhaps you lose the case and they could take the business. But at least you and your personal assets are protected. On the other hand, if you cause a serious car accident, you get sued and they win a judgment against you, you could lose your personal assets, but your business assets are protected. And the reason they are protected is because of that separation between you and the business, which is called the corporate veil. And we're going to talk today more about the corporate veil. We're going to talk about how people lose the corporate veil and what you can do to protect the corporate veil, which really means you are protecting your personal assets from business risk.
By the way, before we do that, Bob, I want to throw this out. If there are any questions in the short term, please go ahead and put them in the chat. If someone immediately wants to talk to Bob, maybe this afternoon or what have you, Bob, how does someone get a hold of you if they want to talk to you today, by the way?
Well, they can give us our office a call at 945-542-7738. And we'll, our office manager will be there to answer the phone, and we'll be happy to set up an appointment if you'd like.
Okay. Can you repeat that one more time a little bit slower, please?
Sure. 945-542-7738.
Awesome. Thank you. And then again, if any question in the short term, we have staffers standing by to answer via chat. But otherwise, if you want to get a hold of Bob immediately, go ahead and call that number. Bob, sorry to interrupt. Go. This is great.
Yeah, interrupt anytime, Kenner. Your comments are always welcome. After all, you're a famous guy.
That's why I love having Bob around. Go ahead, Bob. This is great.
But so the bottom line, to wrap this thought up about a corporate veil, without a corporate veil, you are a sole proprietor, even if you set up an LLC, because the corporate veil of the LLC is not strong enough. That means you now have unlimited personal liability, and let that sink in for a minute. That is the highest risk category you could ever have. All right. Now, a properly structured limited liability company can do wonderful things. It can lower your taxes, as we talked about. You get the right tax structure, it can dramatically lower your taxes throughout the life of your business. It can protect you from lawsuits, and it can also dramatically reduce the risk of an IRS audit. Sole proprietors are audited at the very highest rate, and those with an LLC taxed a certain way are audited at the very lowest rates. All right. Now, that's what a properly structured limited liability company can do. But the truth of the matter is, and what they don't tell you about asset protection, because there's a lot of terrible misinformation out there in misleading ads and all kinds of other places. The bottom line is most LLCs don't lower your taxes. They don't protect you from lawsuits, and they don't protect from IRS audits. And people often wonder, well, why? I mean, an LLC is just an LLC, isn't it? And that's like saying, well, a mushroom is just a mushroom, except there are lots of different kinds of mushrooms, and some are good for you, and some will kill you because they're poisonous. And the same thing is true, we're going to find out, about LLCs. There are some really, really good ones and some really dangerous ones that will not protect you. All right. I just want to mention that in America today, you don't have to do a darn thing wrong to be sued. A lot of times we think, well, I'm a good person. I pick up trash. I go to church. I'm nice to children. Who's going to sue me? Well, the reality is all kinds of people will be happy to sue you. Here's an example. This is a guy who burglarized a house, and he was trying to escape through the garage, but it was one of these mechanical garage doors, with a clicker. It wouldn't open. So he decided to go back through the house, but the idiot had locked the door behind him, and he spent 8 days trapped in the garage with only a case of Pepsi and a bag of dry dog food. When he got out, he filed a lawsuit for mental anguish, and a jury awarded him $500,000 for his suffering, and he's burglarizing a house. Red Bull gives you wings is the slogan, but a bunch of people got together and sued Red Bull. They said that's a misleading statement, and it's a false claim. They said the energy drink didn't give them wings, even figuratively, and they claimed there was no evidence that the beverage could improve somebody's focus, and Red Bull settled out of court and agreed to pay $640,000. This is a case where two teenagers were trespassing on railroad property. They came across two electrical wires, and you know what teenagers are like. Cool, let's pick these up and see what happens. Well, they were live. The kids were severely burned, and the plaintiff's lawyer conceded at trial that his clients shouldn't have been there. They were trespassing, but said the property owners were still responsible, and a federal jury awarded them a total of $24.2 million. Again, you don't have to do anything wrong to be sued in America today. Here's another example, and this will be the last one I give you. There are so many. This is a woman who said, and she was a very, very wealthy real estate investor. She said, my husband was involved in an auto accident that killed a guy and injured another. And the second guy sustained injuries that cost over $1 million in medical bills. And she said, I was sued for everything I had. Now, remember, she's not even in the car. She's at home minding her own business. She said, I hadn't done anything wrong except for owning a Lincoln Town Car in joint ownership. How you own assets makes a very big difference. When you own assets in joint ownership, if your joint owner does something wrong, you can be liable for you can be sued and lose the assets you own jointly with your joint owner. Now, she said, I was being sued for millions and my entire estate was at stake. So be careful how we own our assets. When they play offense against you because they're suing you, they're playing offense, trying to make money off of you. You have no choice because in that game, it's now time for you to play defense. And you've got to have a defense at that point, and that is your asset protection plan. So in the old days, our ancestors, whose lives depended on having a good defense, had typically 3 lines of defense. They had a moat around their castle. Then, if somebody got over the moat, they had some walls they had to get over. And if they got over those walls, there were even higher walls that they had to get over. Because why did they take safety so seriously? Because their lives depended on it and their families' lives depended on it. Now, today, our lives don't depend on it, but our financial lives do. We need to have 3 lines of defense as well. And the first line of defense is privacy. Now, our first goal is to keep you out of a lawsuit because lawsuits are ultimately no win. Even if you win the lawsuit, you still lose because of the time and the expense and the stress and the difficulty of going through 3 to 5 years typically to get to trial. And your life, it really is not great while you are being sued. Typically, you take your eye off of your business to try to protect what you have, and ultimately, it's a no-win situation, even if you win. So keeping your assets private makes you less likely to be the target of an opportunistic lawsuit. Now, that's a frivolous lawsuit. And let me give you a quick example. My wife was in Walmart and she was reaching up on a shelf to get something, and a box fell down and hit her on the head. Well, there are cameras all over Walmart, and people came running out to see if she was okay. And of course, she was okay. It was an empty box. However, are there people who would have taken maximum advantage of that situation? What do you think?
For sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Oh, my neck, I've got headaches. I've had headaches ever since that box fell down on me. I'm suing Walmart. I know they got lots and lots of money. And, if they settle for $100,000 and give me 100,000 or so, maybe 200,000, it's not going to hurt them. Well, that's not you. That's not my wife. But there are people who would sue. Now, there are people who know Walmart has a lot of money, but what if, you're in a car accident and you get hit from behind by a guy driving a Lamborghini? You know that guy's got money. On the other hand, what if you get hit from behind by an 18-year-old kid driving a beater car? Probably no money at all. And so, those are 2 very, very different scenarios. You're more likely to sue the guy with the Lamborghini if there's serious injuries. You're not going to get a darn thing from the 18-year-old kid. Now, the U.S. legal system is very permissive. We have injury lawyers who work on a contingency fee basis. These are personal injury lawyers. And if you're not familiar with that, which I'm sure you are, let me quickly explain. Somebody injured goes to a lawyer, tells their story. The lawyer says, I'll take your case on a contingency fee basis, which means the plaintiff isn't going to pay a dime. The lawyer will invest in the case. The lawyer will pay all the expenses, not charge for their time. And assuming they win, the lawyer will take 30, 40, maybe 50% of everything they collect. So the lawyer gets paid contingent on winning. Now, if you think about this arrangement, you're the one getting sued. You're never going to get a lawyer to take your case on a contingency fee basis. You're going to be paying hundreds of dollars per hour just to defend yourself to keep what you already have. That's a bad situation to be in. The plaintiff doesn't owe anybody a dime if they lose, so there's no reason not to sue. And the only person with serious risk on the plaintiff's side is not the plaintiff, it's the plaintiff's lawyer, because they're going to invest all this time and money, and they've got to believe or have a sense that they're going to get a recovery. Otherwise, they're not going to waste their time. So What the plaintiff's lawyers can do is go to the internet and do what is called an asset search. What would they find if they typed in your name? And this is what the asset search companies say. We identify your bank account, your brokerage account, your real property, vehicles, watercraft, aircraft, business affiliations, and other valuable assets to satisfy judgments. This goes on to say, pre-litigation asset searches determine what assets may be seized in the event of a judgment. And this is the most important part. And for the lawyer to decide if the lawsuit is economically worth the effort. In other words, they're going to size you up economically. They're going to determine how much insurance is there? What can we take if we run through the insurance? Is there more we can take? And here is the solution. You want to have enough privacy so when they type in your name, you are rich, but you look flat broke in an asset search. And how do you look broke? By getting your assets out of your name and into protective entities. One of those is a privacy trust. There are others as well we're going to go over in a minute, but a privacy trust can own the exact same assets you own in your personal name in a trust, and now the trust is the owner of those assets rather than you. Now, don't worry, it's a revocable trust. You can tear it up anytime and put the assets back in your name whenever you want to. But now, in an asset search, the trust, well, look, they're typing in Kenner French. Kenner French put all of his assets in a privacy trust. So nothing comes up in an asset search under Kenner French's name.
Will people see that I'm sorry to ask this question, but I don't know enough about privacy trust. Will people see that I'm moving money into a privacy trust?
They cannot generally see anything about a privacy trust because trusts are not filed. They're therefore not searchable. An LLC is filed with the Secretary of State. It's an open record, public record. The privacy trust is never filed anywhere with the state. And once assets are transferred into a privacy trust, the trail goes cold.
So my personal assets are more apt to use a privacy trust versus a LLC.
Absolutely. Yeah. LLCs are for business assets. Privacy trusts are for personal assets. So privacy trust allows you to own many, many valuable personal assets. So a plaintiff cannot assess how much they can take from you if they win the case. If it looks like they can only get nothing from you, what's the likelihood that they would go forward with the case?
Mm.
All right, that makes it a whole lot less likely you're going to be sued in the first place. Now, another tool that we can use for business assets would be a privacy LLC. Now, a privacy LLC is an LLC that we file very, very carefully, only in certain states, to protect your name and address from appearing on a public record. Let me show you what does appear when people set up their own LLCs. Here's a guy who set up and let's say we're searching for a company called Sun Properties LLC. This happens to be in Florida. And the company is right there at the top, Sun Properties LLC. And all of a sudden, your home address appears because you put the principal address of your home as the principal address of the company. Your name is the registered agent. In other words, we never, ever use you as the registered agent. We always use a commercial company that serves as a professional registered agent. And then finally, I don't know if you can see this down below. I can't. We see that Ted Thompson is the manager.
Yeah,
Now, what if we looked up Ted Thompson? What if we type in his name? Look at what else comes up. 3 other companies that he owns. Now, if you're a plaintiff's lawyer trying to assess, do we want to sue Ted Thompson? It's game on. This guy has 4 companies. Very likely he's got serious money. We keep searching and searching and searching, and we're going to uncover his assets. That is how much information is on public records. So when we file an LLC, we do it very differently. We do not use your home address. We use the principal place of business, which is the registered agent's address. We do not use your name as a registered agent. We use Vast Registered Agents, which is a commercial, professional registered agent company with offices in all 50 states and serves as the registered agent of hundreds of thousands of businesses. And we do not use your email address. We use the Vast Registered Agent email address. And we do not use your name as the manager. We set up a privacy trust to be the manager of the LLC. And so now, even if someone does a search on your company's name, nothing comes up to connect you personally with the company. The trail, once again, goes cold. You've made your business assets disappear. So a privacy LLC keeps your personal information off of public record, so your business cannot be connected to you, giving you business privacy. No one can see how many companies you own. Now,
I'm chime in here. We have I used to think asset protection wasn't a big thing. I used to think, attorneys are just marketing themselves, trying to make money. Man, now that we've gotten a number of clients who are bigger and bigger and bigger, high net worth clients, and who are at the same time are having frivolous lawsuits. Now I'm seeing the value of something like this, privacy trust as an example, LLCs, asset protection. It makes a huge difference because someone doesn't want to work, 20, 30 years, work hard, and all of a sudden lose all their money to a lawsuit. And one way of shielding yourself is making sure that, no one sees that you have assets in the first place. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to throw that out.
Well, I think it's a good observation. Very good. Now, a third type of entity that we can use is a private realty trust. Now, this would be appropriate for someone who owns real estate. But even if you own commercial real estate for your business, this is a good tool, also called a land trust. Now, this is used to hold title to real estate rather than holding title in your personal name or even in your LLC name, which provides much greater privacy and greater security. I'll give you an example. How you hold title to real estate really makes a big difference. I did a search on a particular name. This person's name is Vasilios Lentis. This is in the county recorder's records where the deeds are listed. And this went on for page after page after page after page. In other words, Vasilios Lentis owns a lot of real estate. Now, this is a typical asset search because we typed in his name and look at what comes up. All kinds of real estate. This makes the owner a much bigger target for a lawsuit because obviously there's money here, or at least we could take the properties if we win. So a private realty trust is something we're going to use to replace your name as the owner on a deed. In other words, a land trust. So someone searching the property records cannot tell that the same person owns all of these properties because now this is all they're going to see on the public record. And once again, trusts are not filed anywhere with the Secretary of State. If you want to look up the Sunshine Trust, go right ahead. You can't find it anywhere. So once again, we make your assets disappear to prying eyes.
Why are more people doing this, Bob? I mean, by the way, again, if people have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. And if anyone wants to get a hold of Bob, we'll again give Bob's phone number out. But what I would say is, why aren't more people using privacy trusts? Why aren't more people doing some of these strategies you're talking about?
They simply don't know about them. But when we inform people about them, they say, "Well, sure, of course, that's what I want to do." But most people aren't aware that this is even doable. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Keep going.
Oh, sure. But a privacy trust, a private realty trust, or once again, a land trust, makes it so that the plaintiff cannot see how many properties you own, therefore concluding that there will be little or no recovery, which ultimately discourages them from wanting to sue you. All right. So once again, we're talking about privacy as a first line of defense, like a moat around your castle. And it is designed to protect you from frivolous, ridiculous lawsuits. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that if you really seriously injure somebody in a car accident, they're going to sue you no matter what, whether you have privacy or not. Okay, they're going to sue you. But when somebody is just, on your property and they want to twist their ankle on purpose and then claim that you're a negligent landlord, or your store is a terrible store because, they got injured in your store. Well, privacy can make a very, very big difference when it comes to frivolous lawsuits. All right. All right. Now, a second line of defense is the wall. Let's assume the bad guys got over the moat. They discovered your assets. You didn't have a privacy system, and now they're at the walls. The second line of defense is a strong defensive structure. You want to make those walls so high that they are discouraged from trying to climb the walls. All right. And get at your assets. So we want to talk about lawsuit protection entities, and there are only really two. One is a family limited partnership, and the other is a limited liability company. We use both in different situations. Now, one of the most important things that I hope you will realize as a result of this talk is all LLCs are not the same. A lot of people think, well, I just set up a generic LLC. Well, there really isn't such a thing. There are 25 different types of LLCs. And look at number 24 on this list. It's called a DAO. And that is a new LLC that was created about a year and a half ago in Wyoming. And it is specifically to own crypto. And the manager is an algorithm. So the types of LLCs are very, very different. The setup is very different, and the state where we file it may be very different. The tax structure may be very, very different. But why would we use one over another? It is because of what we want the LLC to do. The purpose of the LLC drives the structure and the design. So when people come to me and they say, well, Bob, I've already got an LLC, that's kind of like saying, Bob, I've got a house or I have a house. It doesn't tell me anything about your LLC. It's like saying I have a car or I have a car. Doesn't tell me anything about the car. It's like I have a bank account, Bob, or I have a bank account. So just saying I have an LLC doesn't mean a darn thing. It doesn't tell me anything about the LLC. Now, when we build a house, we go through certain steps. And the analogy is when we build an LLC, we're also going to go through certain steps. So we start with a foundation. We then frame the house. We put the roof on, the doors and windows go in, the interior gets done. We now finish the interior, and we now have a beautiful house that can protect you and your family from the wind and rain and elements and bad guys. So the question is, when it comes to your LLC, do you have a very carefully designed, well thought out LLC like the house, or do you have an LLC like this? And what I mean by this is so many people have been misled into thinking that you can go to the Secretary of State website and you can answer 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 questions and push a button and pay a little fee, and now you have an LLC. That's kind of like believing in fairy dust. You have the beginning of an LLC, just as this is the beginning of a house. But this is not a house you can live in. And it's not a house that's going to protect you. And an LLC where you have only the articles of organization is not an LLC that's going to protect you or your personal assets. All right. Why not? Well, because the LLC has to be very, very carefully planned and structured. So we spend a lot of time in consultation and in planning before we ever set up the LLC, as opposed to someone who simply goes to the Secretary of State website and starts pushing buttons with no planning at all. There's going to be a very big difference. So the first question is, what do you want the LLC to do? Is this going to be a management company? Is it going to be a holding company? Is it going to be an investor LLC or some other type of LLC? One of the other 22 other types of LLCs. Because remember, the purpose of the LLC determines everything. What do you want it to do? Second, will the LLC own assets, or is it an operating company that does not own assets but does things? All right. What state should we set it up in? There are strong states and there are weak states. In other words, the laws in the strong states say the charging order of the LLC is the sole remedy and the plaintiff gets nothing else. In the weak states, the law says, we understand there's something called a charging order, but we're going to let the judge decide what he or she thinks is fair. Once you've got that, all bets are off. Okay. That in the LLCs set up in the red and orange states are basically not worth the paper they're written on. All right. Now, that doesn't mean automatically you're going to set up every LLC in Alabama, or Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming. You're not going to do that because there are reasons why we would set up a certain state. How many members are there going to be? Is this going to be a single member LLC? Or is it going to be a multi-member LLC? In other words, more than one member. Now, this is critical because single member LLCs, as a general rule, do not protect. Why? Because the corporate veil is very easily pierced in a single member LLC. We haven't gone over corporate veils yet, but we will, and I'll come back to this. Now, there are only 7 states currently that recognize single member LLCs as being just as protective as multi-member LLCs. In the other states, you're really taking a chance. Who are the members going to be? Is it going to be you and your spouse or your kids or your corporation or a trust? Or do you want it to be another LLC, which would be a holding company? Who manages the LLC? Is this going to be manager managed or member managed? How is it taxed? Is it going to be taxed as an S Corp, a C Corp, a sole proprietorship, or as a partnership? Very, very important to get that right. What do you have protective documents such as an operating agreement, a capital account ledger, meeting minutes, resolutions, many, many other ledgers, membership certificates, many, many very important protective documents. Are there key words in your operating agreement, such as a mandatory distribution or a discretionary distribution? Is it a pro rata or a non-pro rata distribution? Language like this determines whether you keep your money or you lose your money. So the question once again is, if you have an LLC already, is it carefully thought out, carefully planned, or is it more like this? Very little thought that went into it. So we have a checklist. We go through these questions. Oftentimes we have several consultations because you're deciding how many members do I want it to be, who's going to manage it, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is we go through this very, very carefully, spend a lot of time planning. But when someone doesn't understand there's a checklist like this, they go straight to the Secretary of State website, start pushing buttons. And is it no wonder that the LLC fails? Well, what's a strong defensive structure? Well, an LLC to start with is a good tool. But how do we use the LLC? If you have 10 rental properties, let's say, and you put all 10 in an LLC, and if there's a slip and fall on one of the properties, they can sue the owner, which is the LLC. And if the judgment is high enough, they could take potentially all of the properties in the LLC. That is why it's a wise thing to separate the properties into different LLCs. So I'm not saying we're going to have one LLC per property. I'm not at all saying that, but we don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket. Now, if there is a slip and fall on one of the properties in one of the LLCs, worst case, they could maybe take the properties in that LLC, but all of the other properties are protected. All right. Now, an even stronger structure is we have different LLCs with different properties in them, but we want those LLCs to be owned by a holding company. Why? Because now you are not the member of the LLC. If they pierce the veil of one of those LLCs, they can't get at you. They have to go through a holding company, which is very, very difficult to pierce. All right. If you have lots of properties, you would want to have a management company for tax reasons. It will help you significantly. So now your business assets are very well protected with a structure like this, but that's only if they sue your business. But if they're suing you personally, what assets can they take when they sue you? And the short answer is your personal assets, because you protected your business assets, but not personal assets. So how do we protect personal assets? We put them in a tool called a family limited partnership, which is specifically designed to protect personal assets. Now, if they sue you personally, they get nothing. If they sue your business, they likely get nothing. You are effectively judgment proof. Now, the cherry on top would be to have a living trust. which we have not yet talked about. We will, but it is an estate planning tool. We want to put everything we have into the living trust. So remember, all the properties are effectively owned by the holding LLC. So we put the holding LLC in the living trust. All your personal assets are owned by the limited partnership. So we put the limited partnership in the living trust. Now you are protected from both probate, very likely estate taxes, and all of your business and personal assets are protected. That is an example of a strong defensive structure. Now, that's not to say everybody's going to have this structure. It's merely an example. All right. Now, some other examples of a strong defensive structure are, it could be really simple. If you're really only doing tax deeds or tax liens, you just need an LLC, but it needs to be structured properly. Or it could be a little more complicated. If you're doing tax deeds and tax liens and you own rental property, now you want to separate those functions into separate LLCs. Or it could be more complex. This is a guy who owned rental properties in Tennessee, Texas, Alabama, Florida. You got to have LLCs in the separate states where the properties are located. He had a management company for tax reasons, a holding company which owned everything. And on top of that, he was doing notes and wholesaling and flipping and tax liens and tax deeds. He had a lot of stuff going on, and therefore he needed a structure like this. We can also use land trusts, which is another completely different structure used with LLCs as well. So the point is this: these structures make the plaintiff's lawyer's job much more difficult to find your assets, much more time consuming, more expensive, more frustrating for the plaintiff's lawyer. Because if they're coming after you, we're going to make this a very difficult game for them to play because you have such a strong defense. Because remember, when we were all little kids on the playground, the bullies didn't pick on the big kids. They picked on the poor little defenseless kids, and you don't want to be that kid. So have a defense. Now, this really works. One of our clients had been sued, but then said, as soon as they found out my assets were protected, they dropped the suit and walked away. Why? Because it wasn't going to be worth pursuing the lawsuit. Once again, that is the goal, to keep you out of a lawsuit and protect yourself.
That's one of the most important parts right there, because if they see, oh, it's going to be hard, me as an attorney, if I know I'm going to get 40% of a big number, hey, great. But if there's a challenge, I'm going to forego that. I'm not going to worry about that.
Exactly right. Most plaintiffs' lawyers are really looking for the quick, easy cases where they never have to go to trial. They're going to get a big fat settlement. Why? Because they're going to clobber you at trial. You have no defense. You have no protection whatsoever, and they can simply just wring a settlement out of you that is much, much higher than it otherwise would have been. They never have to go to trial. That's the kind of case they're looking for: free trial settlements. Okay, so you want to have a very strong defensive structure. That's your second line of defense. Now, the third line of defense is this: you're in trouble. If they got over the moat, they got over the walls, now they're really coming after you, and you darn well better hope that third line of defense is going to hold. You've now been sued. Your third line of defense is your corporate veil. Now, an LLC provides a veil of protection that shields your personal assets from creditors. In other words, just think of it just like the picture. It's like a shield, and the creditors, lawsuits, liabilities are all coming at you, and you're just deflecting those lawsuits with the shield. That is the corporate veil. All right. The problem is this: plaintiffs will actually pierce the protective veil to seize your personal assets in well over 50% of cases. And what that means is now they're cutting right through the corporate veil, and they're seizing your personal assets.
Mm-hmm.
The LLC fails to protect. Now, to prevent the protective veil from being pierced, the courts have made many, many rulings, and they require that three things for your LLC. First, they require that it be properly structured. Just a quick example of that is you don't want to set up an LLC in a state where single-member LLCs are not recognized as being protected. That's not properly structured. Second, You want to have the LLC fully documented. You need to have an operating agreement, minutes, resolutions, capital account ledgers, minute meetings, and membership certificates, full documentation. And then third, you have to operate your LLC in a business-like manner. That is where so many people fail. So let me show you what the courts are saying. Here's just a tiny sample of cases where they pierce the corporate veil. There are so many cases like this. Here's a case in Texas, which is a strong state for liability protection. The LLC veil was pierced because of alter ego. What is alter ego? It means that your LLC lacks a separate identity from you so that you and the business are the same. Doesn't that sound like a sole proprietor? And another way you think of an alter ego is Clark Kent and Superman. Same person, just slightly different identities. Okay. Now, once again, that's a sole proprietor. If it's an alter ego, you and the business are the same. There's no difference between you and the business. All right. How does that happen? I'm going to show you how you avoid alter ego. The veil was pierced in this case because the LLC failed to maintain separate books and records, and members commingled the LLC's funds. Commingling is a death sentence. What is commingling? Well, let's say you've got money in the LLC bank account and you got a credit card bill due, and you just don't have much money in your personal account, so you just pay the credit card bill out of the LLC bank account. That is commingling funds. You keep business funds separate from personal funds. Now, in this example, what you needed to do was simply transfer funds from the LLC bank account into your personal bank account and then write a check on your personal checkbook to pay the credit card bill. All right. That is not commingling funds. But if you're sloppy, then the veil will be pierced. Now, also look at the other thing. The LLC failed to maintain separate books and records. I'll tell you a little more about that. This veil was pierced because they did not observe formal legal requirements. What are those? Florida is one of the strongest states. There's the Florida Supreme Court that pierced the veil because there were no separate bank accounts and profit and loss statements. You mean you have to have books? Yeah. Tell me this. When you get sued, you want the court to regard your LLC as a real company. Here's a question. Do real companies have bank accounts? Yeah. Do real companies have profit and loss statements? Yes. And if your LLC does not, the court will say this isn't a real company. It's really that simple. All right. This is Wyoming. Wyoming Supreme Court pierced the veil because they failed to maintain the requisite corporate formalities. What are those? Here are the corporate formalities. Failure to observe formalities such as failure to keep detailed financial records and minutes of business meetings and decisions. You mean I got to keep minutes? Yeah. That is what is expected by the courts, who will be the final judgment. This is not what I'm saying. This is what the courts are saying. All right. So just one weak entity in your overall structure puts your personal assets at risk, because the plaintiffs will then be able to pierce the corporate veil and seize your personal assets. And the whole point of setting up an LLC in the first place is to protect your personal assets. So why not do it right the first time? Why do it believing in fairy dust and magic that all I have to do is fill out a little form and I'm automatically protected from whatever may come? That's just not reasonable. So here are the types of LLCs that put your personal assets at risk. Once again, single member LLCs set up in a weak state. Remember, there are strong laws, weak laws for LLCs. A one-page LLC, which we see so often, there's no other documentation, that LLC will be pierced. No books, no profit and loss statements, no financial records. You've got to have bookkeeping. Poorly maintained records. People will send in their operating agreement, and this is what I'll see: a fill in the blank form, which they didn't even fill in, and they think they've got an operating agreement. No bank accounts. People will say, well, I've got 3 LLCs. Do I have to have a bank account for every one of them? And the answer, once again, is yes. Every business, real business, has a bank account. There are no minutes or resolutions, and the person commingled business with personal assets. Those are LLCs that will put your personal assets at risk because the veil will be pierced. Once again, that happens in over 50% of the cases. Those LLCs provide no protection at all. Now, there are a lot of real LLCs out there. Here it's Bill Gates's LLC with 30 billion with a B assets in assets. The Walton family has an LLC with $90 billion of assets. I guarantee they didn't set these LLCs up on LegalZoom.
That's a good point.
There are a lot of fake LLCs out there. Once again, an LLC operating agreement that looks like this. You're kidding yourself. A one-page LLC. Once again, you don't know what you don't know. That will not protect you. And I'll have people say, well, I got a free operating agreement off the internet. Okay, let's look a little closer at this. It's an operating agreement is a legally binding business document. Who does it legally bind? You, to follow the procedures that are set out in the operating agreement. In other words, it binds you to operate the LLC according to the agreement between you and the LLC. So many people haven't even read their operating agreement, let alone follow it. Because I'll tell you the first thing that'll happen when you get sued. You will get a subpoena to produce all of your company documents, all your LLC documents. And when I was a trial lawyer, what we would do would be to go over those documents with a fine-tooth comb looking for what is missing. And then it's a gotcha situation. They didn't have this, they didn't have that, et cetera, et cetera. Here are some of the factors that a famous case laid out for protecting against piercing the corporate veil. Lots and lots of different factors. We've summarized those in a document that we'll be happy to send you, but let me just say this. Let's take a 30,000-foot view in a minute here. Is it reasonable to think that you can spend a few minutes filling out a form to create an LLC, and that is going to defeat a team of seasoned plaintiffs' lawyers who make their living suing people and who know every trick in the book? Think about that for a minute. That's your defense? A one-page LLC? If you walk into court with documents like this, how do you think the judge is going to regard you and regard your LLC? Setting up your own LLC with all the complexities is like going to a garage sale and buying a secondhand parachute. You don't know if that thing is going to work or not, and it's got one chance to work. You don't want to risk it. Why in the world would you want to set up your own LLC? Here's a woman who said, I was sued for millions of dollars. I hadn't done anything wrong. After the plaintiff's attorney received copies of my lawsuit protection entities, I didn't have to pay them anything. Your structuring saved me $3 million plus my entire real estate career. I will always be grateful. Another client said, we have 2 of your lawsuit protection entities. We took them to our attorney and he said they were bulletproof. That is the only kind of LLC that you want to have, is a bulletproof LLC. All right? 3 lines of defense: a moat, walls, and even higher walls. Your lines of defense are: first line is privacy, to protect against frivolous lawsuits. Second line of defense is a strong defensive structure, well thought out, well maintained, well operated LLCs. And your third line of defense is your corporate veil. So if you want more information about asset protection, I hope this has been helpful. We're happy to talk with you. You can contact Asset Defense Team, my company, at info@assetdefenseteam.com, or you can call our number at 945-542-7738. Thank you, Kenner.
Wow, Bob, that was a very, very powerful Very powerful presentation. I really appreciate you spending time. For all those people who are putting in questions in the chat, we're going to be answering those as time goes on. Also, please, if you're interested in dealing with Bob, I'm going to tell you one thing. I've known Bob for quite a while now. And I, at the same time, know a lot of good attorneys. I mean, really good attorneys. I would say he's the best attorney. He is a strategist. He's looking out for the client. We wouldn't refer business to him if we didn't think he was the best. And he is truly one of the best. No, I'm sorry. He is truly the best when it comes to strategy, to lowering the potential risk of lawsuits. Please do get a hold of him. You see his number, et cetera, et cetera. Man, this has been a pleasure, Bob. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. For all those people who are out there, I really appreciate you taking the time. And if you really do, well, want to amass a net worth and have little risk or limited risk, go ahead and call Bob. Once again, this is Kenner French with VastSolutionsGroup.com. Thanks, everybody.